Hi, Amanda.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. It does not have my name on here, but I'm Emily. I think we've actually corresponded when I was with Sarnco recently.
Oh, okay.
And now I'm at the Alliance, so it's good to see you virtually this way. So I'm going to be helping out with the tech support today.
Okay.
Really, that's just setting up things beforehand so that we're the most accessible version of ourselves that we can be in this format. So I'm going to turn on the captions here. I'm going to spotlight you and the interpreters when they join. I'm going to be making you a co-host. Just in case anything happens, you and Chandra will be co-hosts, and then I believe that's it for me. And then if there's anything, of course, that happens, anything tech related that we need support with, like I'll be paying attention to the chat along with Chandra, and we'll both be here to support you. And with that being said, I'll let Chandra take it over.
Thanks, Emily. How are you, Amanda? How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Nice to meet you virtually.
Me too.
So Emily's going to be handling the tech. We're going to be like kind of co-piloting it. But I'm going to be introducing you. So I wanted to know if you definitely want me to read your bio. I have it up and ready to go. If that's okay with you. Okay. Yep. I know some people are I'm a little weird. I don't like when people read my bio. So I always want to check in first and foremost to make sure it's good. And how do you pronounce the area in the South Pacific where you volunteered at? I want to make sure I get that correct.
Vanuatu.
Vanuatu.
Yes.
Vanuatu. Okay, I might ask you one more time before we let everybody in.
No, that's perfect.
Awesome. And then just want to make sure that we're good. So you are going to monitor their chat on your own, but like verbally, if you miss anything, do you want us to wait to the end to ask those questions, or try to kind of pause in the moment to ask them?
Let's wait till the end.
Okay.
Yeah. And if I see anything that's like relevant to pause for, I will pause for it. And then if I miss anything, we can just wait till the end. Otherwise, I go off on tangents and then I always
Great. Me too. And time check. Are you okay if I still put like 10 minutes left in the chat, or would you like me to say that verbally?
In the chat is fine.
Okay, perfect. So questions at the end and 10-minute time check in the chat. Anything else you can think of that would be helpful for you? Okay, awesome. I'm excited to hear you present.
Do you know, is Kyle one of the interpreters for today?
I think so, but let me pull it up.
When I am unmuted, can y'all hear the fan that's in my background, or do you just hear silence?
I don't hear any feedback other than your voice, so we're good.
Awesome.
And we have one interpreter here with us, which is great. Welcome, Krista.
Hi.
And Krista, will you be starting off?
No, actually my team, Kyle will be.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to let Kyle into the Zoom room here, and then I'll spotlight you both along with Amanda.
Yeah, and the way that we've been doing it thus far is we'll both be spotlighted. The one that's actually interpreting will have their camera on. The other interpreter will have their camera off. And then when it's time to switch, about 15, 20 minutes at that natural kind of a pause, the other interpreter will turn their camera on and vice versa.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, everybody should be spotlighted now. And if we're good to go on your end, Amanda, I will let folks into the waiting, or let folks in from the waiting room.
Sounds good.
Okay, here we go.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're going to wait just a few more minutes before we get started with our presentation. I can still see some people trying to connect. So if you give us maybe 1 or 2 minutes, we will go ahead and get started. Maybe 2 more minutes. People are still connecting their audio. And I think we don't technically start till 1:35, so I want to start closer to that time for people who may have taken a break. If that's okay with you, Amanda. Perfect. Alrighty, it's 1:35 and I want to make sure that everyone gets the most out of this workshop. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Chandra Witherspoon. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Coordinated Community Responses at the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. I have the honor and privilege of introducing our speaker for our Cultivating Affirmation and Belonging for LGBTQ plus youth, Amanda Erickson. Amanda has worked with Kaleidoscope Youth Center since 2017, focusing on advocating for LGBTQIA plus youth across Ohio through education for youth serving professionals, including teachers, social workers, and more. Amanda has a Bachelor of Science in Education from Bowling Green State University and spent 2 years post-college as a Peace Corps volunteer, educating teachers in Vanuatu in South Pacific. Since returning to the U.S., she has worked in education and programming in the local nonprofit sector. Amanda, the floor is yours, and I'll come back when we wrap up to give everybody the CLE and CEU code word.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks for inviting Kaleidoscope to be part of this conference. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. I hope it's been a good first morning for you. And we will jump right in. So I want to give you a crash course about Kaleidoscope Youth Center in case you haven't heard of us first. We are located in downtown Columbus, and we are the largest and longest serving organization in Ohio that's solely dedicated to serving and supporting LGBTQIA plus youth. Our mission is to work in partnership with youth to provide safe and inclusive spaces in our drop-in center, in schools, and in our community. So our drop-in center programming is currently virtual. We have been closed since March of 2020, but we do have, fingers crossed, plans to reopen yet this summer. But that includes social connection, current events discussion, and affinity groups for trans and non-binary youth, as well as an affinity group for QPOC, which stands for Queer People of Color. Pre-pandemic, youth would come to our center around 3:30 each day, and from 3:30 to 5 o'clock, we just had drop-in time. They could get something to eat, chat with a staff member, find resources, use a computer, play games, kind of just hang out. And then starting at 5 o'clock each evening, we would have scheduled programming. That could look like a specific discussion group that was about gender and sexuality topics of some kind. So maybe coming out at school or dealing with unsupportive parents, or it could just be art night or movie and pizza night, something totally unrelated to that gender and sexuality piece, but allowing youth to be together in a safe space with folks with similar experiences as their own and experiencing that social time together. Since the pandemic started, we have been doing most of that on a Discord server. If you're unfamiliar with Discord, but you've used Slack, it's the same thing. If you're also unfamiliar with Slack, I think of it like the AOL chat room of 2020. It's, you know, this text-based discussion board. Essentially, we have security permissions on it so that it stays a safe space for our youth, but they are in there having discussion groups via text, you know, every afternoon. So that's been a really exciting opportunity for them to be able to stay in community with us. Our education and training program is my domain, and my goal with that is taking the safe space that we've created within Kaleidoscope Youth Center and extending it into the rest of the community. So when young people come to our after-school program, they usually get to us in a very bad mood, just really grumpy in general, having had a terrible day. And a lot of that is contributed to by just people saying things throughout the day that they shouldn't be saying, or that they don't realize they shouldn't be saying, and just kind of negative interactions piling up on each other. So whether it was something that a caregiver said when they woke up that morning, whether it was being bullied in the school bus on the way to school, or being treated badly in the classroom, there are just all of these issues that happen throughout the day that we're trying to get folks to understand better how to avoid. So we do a lot of teacher training, a lot of training for people on the best practices for working with LGBTQ youth, things to say versus things not to say, in an effort to create more of those safe spaces in more places so that Kaleidoscope isn't the only place that youth are coming to really feel like they belong. And then finally, our KYC Connections program provides case management and housing support to 16 to 24-year-olds. So the youth homelessness issue in Ohio is huge, and LGBTQ youth are drastically overrepresented in the youth homelessness population. There are several different organizations around the city and around Central Ohio that are focused on tackling that problem. None of them are looking at it through specifically a queer lens. So that's the gap that we are trying to fill at Kaleidoscope. We have a rapid rehousing program where we've been able to house about 10 youth in apartments throughout Columbus, and we provide case management and resource support for other youth that are in need. So that's kind of us in a very big nutshell, the things that we do. Next, I want to talk about kind of the why we do what we do. And this is some context as we move into the rest of today's talk. So first, the historical and cultural context of sexual rights is one of persistent inequality, especially for queer communities and communities of color. And the history of mental health treatment of LGBTQ populations is uneasy. LGBTQ identities have historically been considered mental illnesses that needed to be cured or behaviors that were criminalized. Normalizing LGBTQ identities is still a huge task in today's society. So I say history and historically, but this is not ancient history, right? And even beyond just being, in our lifetimes, a lot of this is current events. It is still often considered by many people that LGBTQ identities are some sort of mental illness. And that's part of the barrier that we need to get through to get full inclusion for everyone. Prejudice and discrimination have strongly negative impacts on the health of young people, both mental and physical. LGBTQ discrimination, racism, sexism, etc., are rampant in many of the systems and institutions that young people engage with. Just because they are young, right, does not mean that they are somehow shielded from everything else that everyone is dealing with in America in 2021, right? Our young people are still seeing current events happen on the news. They're still having things happen to them at school that are related to prejudice and discrimination. None of this is to be downplayed just on the basis of age. And that brings us to my final point, which is adultism. And this is a little bit of a soapbox that I think I will probably end up revisiting quite a number of times today. But this is this idea that we reflect ambivalent feelings on the rights of minors, right? That we believe as a culture that adults know more than youth by default, that teenagers are rebellious, that youth and inexperience means that somebody isn't deserving of their own choices. That's a cultural thing, right? That's something that's ingrained into many of us just by the way that we grew up and the things that were surrounding us. We at Kaleidoscope, though, intentionally believe that all people, no matter how young they are the experts in their own experiences and should have control over their own private lives and their own futures. And I have a cartoon that I think outlines really well the way that adultism applies to queer and trans youth and this field that we're working in. So this is called Self-Affirmation. The artist is Sophie LaBelle, and this is her Instagram handle there at the top, LaBelle Sophie. She does a lot of comic artistry from her own experiences, and she does a lot kind of to challenge what I think a lot of folks think is the norm, right? So in the left-hand column, we have cisgender kids. Quick term review, cisgender means that someone's gender identity aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So maybe someone was assigned male at birth and identifies as a boy, right? Cisgender. On the right-hand column, we have transgender kids. So transgender meaning someone whose gender identity is different than the sex that they were assigned at birth. So for this first row, we have a cisgender boy saying, I'm a boy, and the adult says, yep. Simple, makes sense. Then the trans boy says, I'm a boy, and the adult says, you're too young to know that. And that's a reaction that most of our youth at Kaleidoscope have heard multiple times. You are too young to know. The second row has a cis kid saying, I don't like my name, call me Zaza. And the adult says, oh, okay. The next kid says, I don't like my name, call me Zaza. And the adult says, you're too young to decide. And our kids hear this all of the time from their parents. You're too young to change your name. from their teachers, you're too young to make that change, right? And yet it's fine for someone to have a nickname. In the last row, we have a cis kid saying, I hate being called she because I'm a boy. And the adult says, yeah, I get that. The trans kid is probably about to say the same thing, but can't get a word out, and the adult is already yelling too young. Our youth hear these things all of the time, right? And science has shown us that young people often know their gender identity or something about it at like 2 or 3 years of age. Like there is no such thing as too young to have these conversations. And there's no such thing as us being able to tell someone that they are too young to have the experience that they are experiencing. They may not understand it. They may need our support to figure out what's going on and what it all means. But their own identity and experience is theirs, and they are never too young to hold on to that. So as we move through the rest of today's presentation, I want us to keep that in mind, because I think for people that work with children, especially, this can be the sticking point, right? We all like to think, oh, I'm supportive of queer rights, I'm supportive of trans people, you know, I'm a good ally. And then the adultism piece often trips us up regardless. And we have this idea that no, someone is too young to be making this statement. Okay, when really none of that should be the case. So for today, we're going to start with a reflection to draw in on your experiences as children, to think about putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and really to identify kind of where these youth are coming from. And then we'll talk about youth experiences, specifically middle and high school students who identify as LGBTQIA, and the things that they go through on a regular basis at school. Then we'll talk about what it means to be a visible ally and make your environment safer for these youth, and action steps that you can take moving forward. Quick housekeeping items. I do find it difficult to keep up with the chat when I'm also presenting. I will do my best to make time for answering questions kind of between things, but we're definitely going to try to leave time for Q&A at the end. So if you would like to like jot down a question and bring it back to the chat at the end, that is totally fine. We've also got folks watching the chat, so if I miss something, they'll be able to direct me back to it when we're finished today. I'm also going to share my contact information at the end of the session. So if you are like going to bed tonight and realize, oh, I didn't understand this thing she said, I should have asked about it, feel free to email me and I will get back to you. Okay. So we're going to warm up our imaginations really quickly with kind of a guided imagery. This is from the Teaching Transgender Toolkit, which was published by Planned Parenthood of the Southern Finger Lakes in 2015. And this is a guided imagery to walk us through what it means or what it could mean to be a young person who does not identify as cisgender, right? Feel free to follow along with me with your eyes closed, or just soften your gaze, or watch me talk, whatever feels good to you. But I'm going to read this section, and I want you to imagine these things happening to you, and then we're going to chat briefly about it when we're finished. Okay? So I want you to imagine with me an average day as a young person who is trans, around the age of 7. Okay. If you currently identify as a woman, please imagine that everywhere you go, the people around you treat you as if you are a little boy. You are expected to act and dress like a boy. Everyone refers to you using male pronouns and nicknames. He, him, his, little man, Buster, Champ, and so on. And even though you know in your heart and your mind that you are a girl, everyone around you insists that you are a boy and demands that you act accordingly. If you currently identify as a man, please imagine that everywhere you go, the people around you treat you as if you were a little girl. You are expected to act and dress as a girl, and everyone refers to you using female pronouns and nicknames she, her, sweetie, girly, or darling. Even though you know in your heart and mind that you are a boy, everyone around you insists that you are a girl and demands that you act accordingly. When you get out of bed in the morning, you survey your closet and you aren't happy with any of the clothing options that you see. These clothes make you feel really uncomfortable and upset when you wear them. Your parents tell you to hurry up and get dressed, so you pick the clothes, excuse me, that are least uncomfortable. They make you feel more like yourself. When you get on the bus in the morning, some of the other kids tease you. They say mean things like, "What are you, gay or something?" And "Why do you dress like that?" Other kids ignore you. You feel isolated and alone. Once you get to school, you are asked to line up by gender and you consistently get yelled at for where you go. The teacher tells you to stop causing problems and get in the correct line or they'll call your parents. During recess, the other kids group together by activity, but you have a hard time choosing. When you do what you really want to do, it results in more teasing. You're sad, frustrated, and confused. Now imagine that you're 14. For the past few years, your body has been changing in ways that are profoundly uncomfortable. You are starting to have sexual feelings and fantasies, which are confusing because it feels good, but it also feels uncomfortable. You have asked your close friends questions to see if they have similar feelings, but so far, no one has had a similar experience. At the same time, everyone else is suddenly interested in hooking up and dating, and that feels overwhelming. Sometimes you feel like you should just hook up or date so that other people will stop harassing you about whether or not you're gay. And besides, you really do want to be in a relationship, but things are just so overwhelming. You know that you are attracted to one gender, but think that you might also be attracted to another gender. Maybe all of this discomfort is because you are gay. You seek out information online about being gay, but somehow it doesn't seem to fit. You found a transgender teen support forum, and a lot of what you find there makes sense, but it's super scary. You wish that someone could understand where you are coming from, explain why you feel this way, and help you figure out how to make it stop feeling so bad. You can't talk to your parents about this. Over the years, you've noticed your parents saying little things here and there about how transgender people are wrong and how they would never let their kid do that. You're afraid of how they would react if you told them, and life is hard enough as it is. You don't want to risk their rejecting you just because you aren't sure that you will be able to handle it. Every day starts to feel like a battle, and you are exhausted. You're feeling increasingly depressed and start looking for things to make you feel better. You saw the "it gets better" videos online, but frankly, you just can't see how that could possibly be true for you. Take a moment now to reflect on how you're feeling. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes, rejoin the group mentally. And then if and when you feel comfortable, pop something into the chat about how you are feeling after all of that, whether it's one word, a sentence, a phrase. Yeah, I see helpless, lonely, frustrated, alone, rejected, afraid, misunderstood, confused, sad, depressed, hurt, yeah, I think there is a range of feelings in there. And for the most part, all of those feelings are negative, right? There were a few different alone or lonely senses of feeling. People often say isolated. Follow-up question, thinking back to, all of the things that happened during this day in the life, where or when are some areas that someone could have stepped in, an ally could have stepped in? Or when did someone cause something to happen and maybe their behavior could have been something different to support you as this child? Where are some places that things could have gone differently? If you are typing, keep typing. But in case nobody's typing, one example could be, when you arrived at school, the teacher was lining students up by gender, right? And think about all of the other ways that we constantly divide on the basis of a gender binary. And we just do it without even thinking about it, right? It's so normalized. This is a way to divide people. This is a way to divide things. This is a way to create a competition, right? And think about, the feelings that come with that for a young person who doesn't fit into either of those binary boxes, or feels that they belong in one that's not expected of them. Yeah, in the chat we have a parent could have asked about what the child would rather wear since they didn't feel comfortable in their own clothes. Right? We all deserve to find, something clothing wise that we feel good in, that is, creates our best selves. And that could extend to these children as well. I'll give like 2 more minutes in case anybody thinks of anything else that you'd like to offer in the chat. And then kind of a final question for this scenario is, based on your experience with this imagining, right? What could be some ways that having strong allies in someone's life could be beneficial? Maybe it's just a reminder of your value and your worth. Yeah, combating adultism if the ally is an adult. So having someone communicate to the school on their behalf. We actually, it's interesting that you bring that up. And we do that a lot at Kaleidoscope, and I hate that I have to do it, right? But I've had high schoolers approach me with issues that they are having at the school level, and they are advocating really well for themselves, and they're not being listened to. And so they'll come to us with their concerns, and, you know, whether it's about contacting the assistant principal or whether I happen to know the right person at the district, I can call a person and say, hey, this is an issue that's happening. How can we solve this? And the issue is solved. And so that adultism piece, right, that that Lisa brought up, thank you for that. You know, this idea that like we encourage youth to advocate for themselves, and yet like folks aren't necessarily listening to them. They need that adult ally to convince them, oh yeah, this is the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. Having an ally would reduce loneliness. Absolutely. We would feel validated and included. Having one friend can make a difference in somebody's life. Self-esteem is boosted. Teaching kids about kindness and anti-bullying as an ally can help create an inclusive culture at school. Absolutely. These are all fantastic ideas. Thank you so much for your participation. And I'm gonna keep us moving with some of those experiences at the school level. If you are not like based at the school level, that's okay. I think all of this is really relevant to everyone who's working with youth, regardless of whether it's specifically the school environment or something else. I also think if you are not a person that works directly with youth, you can also find a lot of parallels between these experiences and any work that you're doing with adults as well. So a lot of what we're going to talk about in terms of experiences at school have similar parallels with experiences in the workplace, experiences with family structures. A lot of this is really easy to translate from age group to age group and demographic to demographic. All of this obviously is coming from us as a youth center being like focused on youth. And hopefully everybody can find something here. So this information is coming from GLSEN, G-L-S-E-N, which I have cited at the bottom of the screen. And GLSEN every other year does a national school climate survey to determine basically the safety of students, of LGBTQ students at the middle school and high school level. What these findings find is that Ohio schools are not safe for most LGBTQ secondary school students. In addition, many students in Ohio don't have access to important school resources like LGBTQ inclusive curriculum, and they're often not protected by supportive and inclusive school policies. So we're going to talk some specifics on the next few slides, and then about some of the consequences of this discrimination. So LGBTQ students in Ohio are regularly prevented from expressing public displays of affection in school. So this is not about a PDA policy and its existence, right? This is about the unfair enforcement of a PDA policy. So we hear experiences of students where two boys are walking down the hallway holding hands, and a straight couple is making out at their locker. And it's the two boys that get detention for holding hands, and the straight couple making out gets ignored. So this unfair enforcement of this policy, and then that enforcement exists to discriminate against non-straight couples. Students are regularly prevented from using the bathroom and the locker room that align with their gender identity. This tends to be a big topic that folks like to dwell on. And I would argue like all of the other things that we're going to talk about are just as important. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on the bathroom issue. What we often hear from students is that maybe they have a specific bathroom in the school that they're allowed to use. Maybe it's the nurse's restroom. Maybe there is a single stall locking staff bathroom. And students that don't want to go in the bathroom that aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth are told that they can go in this staff bathroom, right? Some issues arise with that, including sometimes the distance between the locker and the bathroom is too far to actually get there and back between classes. Maybe students have been told they're allowed to use a bathroom, but all of the other staff were not told, and so they get disciplined for using the bathroom that they've been told they're allowed to use, but it's by a different staff member. Lots of different things arise, right? In an ideal world, every restroom would have walls and doors that went from the floor to the ceiling and did not have little gaps beside the doors. You couldn't see between them. There would be complete privacy. The doors would all lock, and therefore all bathrooms could be gender neutral, right? Because what it comes down to is a privacy issue. And the issue at hand with school restrooms is that they are not private at all, and locker rooms are even less private. However, to create that ideal world, we would need a lot of money, right? Which we don't necessarily have. And so the result of this is, oh, you can use this other restroom. The best policy for bathroom use in a school would be that each student can use the bathroom that they feel most comfortable in, period, right? But that doesn't often end up happening. Students in Ohio are regularly prevented from using their chosen name or gender pronouns. So oftentimes teachers will say, well, this is the name that I have on my roster, so this is the name that I'm going to call you. Or a parent or a teacher will say, I will call you by they, them pronouns, but I'm going to call your dad first and make sure that it's okay. And therefore outing the student, which is inappropriate. Students are regularly prevented from wearing clothing that's considered inappropriate for their gender, including extracurricular themes, including LGBTQ themes in extracurricular activities or discussing LGBTQ issues in assignments. So maybe a school has a diversity club and they want to do a pride bulletin board display and somebody tells them they can't. That's not an appropriate thing for their after school activity. Or maybe someone's doing a report on, I don't know, 1960s politics, and they want to talk about the Stonewall riots, and someone says, oop, that's not appropriate for your report. You can't talk about that. And students are regularly prevented from wearing LGBTQ supportive apparel. So this one and the top of the slide are dress code related. We could have an entire presentation or conversation just on dress code, right? Dress codes are usually unfairly gendered. They're usually unfairly enforced. They're usually subjective. And so where this comes into play with LGBTQ supportive apparel is you'll often find the word appropriate in a dress code, but like who gets to decide what's appropriate and what's not, right? So then you'll have students that are wearing clothing that's like from the Target Pride display, or the Human Rights Campaign has a shirt that says, yay, gay. And maybe the dress code policy is you can't wear anything with words on it. Okay, then don't wear the yay, gay shirt. But more often it's gonna say no inappropriate words or branding. So now that we have something subjective to look at, an administrator could say, oh, that yay, gay shirt is inappropriate because it's saying whatever it's saying and doesn't follow our dress code. Students in Ohio are often unable to bring a same gender date to the school dance. They're often unable to form a GSA. So a GSA is a gender and sexuality alliance or a gay straight alliance, and is generally an LGBTQ extracurricular activity at a school. Students are often prevented or discouraged from playing school sports due to an LGBTQ identity. And this is a very hot topic in America right now. If you have, I guess, been watching the news at all, you have probably seen these things. Ohio is one of something like 35 states already to introduce a bill or some kind of legislation to ban trans youth from playing sports, essentially, at the school level. If you have questions about this, feel free to put it in the chat at the end today when we do Q&A, because I would love to wax poetic on any of this with you. And I'm going to avoid that tangent right now. But also, like, I encourage you to Google that on your own time. If you are a sports person, if that's something you're interested in, be aware that that kind of discrimination is huge at the moment. And then students in general are often disciplined at school just for identifying as LGBTQ, right? So what does all of this mean? Why does it matter? What we find is that students who experience LGBTQ discrimination at school are more than 3 times more likely to have missed school than those who did not experience the same discrimination. Their rates of discipline are generally higher. Their mental health risk factors are much higher, including substance abuse and suicidal ideation and attempts. Their physical health disparities are also much higher, particularly in terms of sexual health. So whether it's due to a lack of sex education in general or a lack of comprehensive and inclusive sex education, LGBTQ students actually have higher rates of unplanned pregnancies than non-LGBTQ peers. Their overall GPAs are lower by an average of 0.3, which could be caused by that absenteeism, right? It's harder to do well in school when you're not attending school. And then self-esteem and school belonging are both lower in general as well. And those are those resiliency factors that would make everything else a little bit better, right? When we have high self-esteem to start with, when we have a high amount of belonging in an environment to start with, it's easier to handle anything else that might come our way. But these students are starting out with lower self-esteem, right? And so everything else is just compounding that much harder. My next 2 slides include specific statistics regarding suicide risk. So this is a quick content warning. If you need to take a step away, do your thing, take care of yourself. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth who come from highly rejecting families are 8.4 times as likely to have attempted suicide as lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth who reported no or low levels of family rejection. And each episode of LGBT victimization, such as physical or verbal harassment or abuse, increases the likelihood of self-harming behaviors by 2.5 times, right? So what I've done with this really, really basic illustration is I have lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth from highly rejecting families represented on the right in orange, and lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth reporting no or low levels of family rejection on the left in red. So this is just representing that 8.4 times, right? This illustration, these statistics do not include straight youth. This is just about whether or not families are terribly rejecting or anywhere ranging from only kind of rejecting to supportive. And what I hope to drive in with these statistics is the point that identity is not the barrier. When we talk about mental health risk factors in youth, identity is not necessarily causing the issue. What is often causing the issue is unaffirming families, peers, and other adults. In a national study, 40% of trans adults report having made a suicide attempt. And 92% of those individuals reported having attempted suicide before the age of 25. To compare that to the general population, the source that I found had that approximately 0.5% of adults, just overall in general, have made a suicide attempt. So how do we get to 40%? Right? How do we go from 1% on the right-hand side to 40% in the top left? Think about this for a minute in context of the last slide, right? Remember how I said that the risk factor is often not identity, but it's about how everybody else responds to them and either affirms them or rejects them. The suicide problem amongst LGBTQ folks, and especially transgender individuals, and as shown by the bottom chart amongst transgender youth, is massive. So if being supportive and affirming of LGBT youth can make this much of a difference here, imagine what we could do to this 40% if the majority of teachers and youth serving professionals and parents were supportive of their children. But what does supportive look like, right? What does that even mean? We keep saying like supportive and affirming. What does all of that mean? Now we're getting to kind of the to-do list, things that you can do as a professional to make sure that young people that you work with feel affirmed and supported. So first, understand the diversity within the LGBTQ community. There are 5 different letters just right there, LGBTQ. The acronym can go a lot further in other contexts. And when we start adding the intersections of race, sex, class, ability, we find infinite experiences, backgrounds, different people with different needs. With that, we want to avoid making assumptions. So we'll try not to assume someone's pronouns or their gender, just like we don't assume their name or their age. And that's really hard because we've been socialized to make those assumptions, right? We've been told our entire lives, if a person looks like this, right, we refer to them as she or he. And those are assumptions that really aren't right to make. So we want to try to identify when we're making those assumptions, keep them in check, and think about how we can avoid them. Use inclusive, non-gender specific language that does not assume heterosexuality. So we can use words like partner, significant other, parents, students, friends. And think about the other ways that people who work with children constantly gender them. How often do you say or hear boys and girls or ladies and gentlemen? And what can you say instead, right? Pay attention to how you use gender in other ways as well. Do you consistently allow for boys versus girls in competition? If you're a teacher, do you find yourself lining the children up by gender? And what are some other ways that we can get those things done without including gender in the mix? We want to support people who come out to us. So when someone comes out, you can thank them first. Thank you for trusting me, and ask how you can support them. Maybe they're telling you this information because they need help, right? But don't become a savior. Don't assume that they need help or need you to do a specific thing. Just take their lead. For really young children, you could just listen, and that's often all they need, right? My wife runs a summer day camp, and last year there was a 6-year-old at the day camp who said, well, I don't want my self-portrait to be a boy because I don't feel like a boy or a girl. I'm just a kid, right? And the supportive response at that time for the 6-year-old is for the adult camp counselor to just say, okay, cool, and listen to whatever it was that this camper was going to follow up with, right? That's all they needed at that time. We want to call out negative behaviors, respond to anti-LGBTQ language as soon as we hear it, right? At the school level, I hear so many reports from students about bullying in the hallways that the teachers just literally walk right past. Everybody's tired, right? It's hard work, but the students need somebody to have their backs. And then treat the topic of sexual orientation just like any other aspect of human diversity. Right? Talking about LGBTQ identities is not sex ed. We also don't want to encourage kids from talking about these identities. We just want to make sure that the conversation is respectful and continues to move in a respectful direction. I want to dive a little bit deeper into supporting people that come out to us. if someone comes out to us in a professional setting, there's probably a reason. The number one reason is they've picked you because they trust you. So again, the first thing that we can do is thank them for their trust, and also pat yourself on the back, right? Because if they trust you enough to come out to you, you are already doing some of that affirming allyship work that we need folks to do. The next thing that we want to do is find out how well known this information is. If you are the very first person that they've come out to, we have to keep that information confidential. This is difficult for a lot of people, and part of that goes back to that adultism piece, right? Oops, I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button. It's really important that we trust youth in their decisions about who we give what information when, right? A lot of youth do not come out at home at all. They'll come out at school, they'll come out at after school programs, they'll come out to their therapist, they're not going to come out to their parents, right? And a major reason for that is safety and security. Sometimes when folks are not part of a family structure, let's say a teacher, for example, if a student comes out to a teacher at school, the teacher's first feeling is sometimes, oh, we have to tell your parents, right? But we want to stop first, just hit pause. And we have to consider the danger that we could be putting that young person in if we're not intimately aware of their family dynamics, okay? Instead, we want to encourage them to have the conversation with other folks who can help in certain situations. Do they feel like their mental health has suffered? Maybe connect them with a school counselor or a mental health professional. Are they having an issue with student behavior in a specific class? Ask if you can make that connection to a teacher in that class or mediate a group conversation. The most important part of the entire coming out conversation is that whoever it is that's coming out is in charge, right? Even if this person is a child, and remember, we're trying to avoid being adultist. Even if this person is a child, that child has to be in the driver's seat of their coming out story. And we can guide them along the way, but they have to be in agreement throughout the process. And confidentiality is so important when it comes to that coming out process, right? With all of that said, a student's only going to come out to you if you've created that relatively safe environment, right? So here are some more kind of tips and tricks to figure out how to do that. The easiest things that you can do are normalizing pronoun use, right? You can do this by offering your own pronouns, like folks have done in their introductions. You can offer places for other people to give their pronouns. And if someone tells you a pronoun that's different than what you assumed or expected, just affirm them by using their correct pronouns at all times. Right? If you are a person that is still being thrown off by the usage of they, them pronouns, right? If you are feeling like, oh, this is such a new thing, I just don't get it, like, that's okay. You're not a bad person, right? Practice. Just practice using them. A new study actually just found that 1 in 4 young people uses a gender neutral pronoun. So if you think you haven't met anybody that uses they, them pronouns, first, yes, you have. You just didn't know it. Either they didn't tell you or you didn't ask, right? Or it wasn't absolutely relevant to the topic at hand. And use them in the future, okay? You can find out somebody else's pronouns just by asking them, what pronouns do you use? You can also just introduce yourself with your pronouns to normalize that situation, okay? When you introduce yourself with your own pronouns, there's gonna be light bulbs going off in other people's heads like, ooh, that person knows what pronouns are. That's great, maybe they're an ally. Maybe I can trust them with this thing that I need to talk about. What happens if you mess up somebody else's pronouns? We'll do a quick Q&A. Type in the chat what you would do if you messed up somebody else's pronouns. Awesome. We've got a bunch of answers in. We've got apologize, thank them, correct yourself, do better, move on, fix it. Awesome. Let's visit the apology really quickly. I actually just heard about this recently, relatively recently, and I want to kind of pitch it to the group. Is this idea that when we apologize, right, in our society, there's this expectation that the person that we're apologizing to forgives us, or more simply, they say, oh, that's okay, don't worry about it, no problem, right? And they brush it off. And we use that apology to make ourselves feel better, right? We say sorry, we expect them to say that's okay. Now we feel like that's okay. We have redeemed ourselves in our own eyes. And so my challenge for you all, when thinking about that apology, right? And a couple of people said this, move on quickly, right? Just correct yourself and move on. And saying sorry is fine. It's not bad to apologize. And a few people noted, thank them. And that piece is really important. If you've misgendered someone, if you've used the wrong pronoun to describe someone and they corrected you themselves, thank them for that time and labor that they took to correct you. Thank them for trusting you to do better next time, right? I'm sorry, thank you, I will do better next time, move on. And don't dwell on it. Moving on quickly can be the most important. And what we hear from young people a lot is a teacher, for example, will misgender a student will correct them, the teacher will just fall over themselves apologizing. Oh, thank you so much. I'm so sorry. You just have to understand how hard this is for me. I'm doing my very best. I'm still getting used to, referring to people with they, them pronouns. It just doesn't feel, natural to me. And I'm trying my hardest. And thank you so much. And I'm so sorry, blah, 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 blah. And the kid is standing there like, okay, can I go to the bathroom? That's what I was asking for anyway, right? Like, can we just move it along? And what we're doing when we just fall over ourselves apologizing like that is we are centering ourselves in that situation instead of centering the person who we've caused harm to. And it's really important that we keep that person in the center of our attention and we just thank them and do better next time. Right? Awesome. We also want to use inclusive curricula and materials. So I think a lot of you are probably from various different fields, but in terms of teaching, this is about using inclusive curricula, about reading books about trans characters, about talking, queer history and the queer liberation movement. This is also for, social workers or librarians or anybody that's recommending certain materials to folks to use. Make sure that you're recommending inclusive materials, right? Hey, you should go read this book that is about this character. Oh, you should look at this website because it has this kind of information on it, right? Make sure that all of those things are including lots of different diversity within them so that people are seeing their own selves reflected back at them. This could even be used in your own home. Think about the inclusivity of the material that your family has access to, your household has access to. Watch movies about LGBTQ people, talk about them as a family, right? When we talk about how to be an inclusive parent, just providing those positive messages is probably the number one most important. Visibly affirming staff is really important, making sure that all of the staff in an organization are trained. Maybe that this type of training is mandatory because it's not, right? I went to school to be a teacher. Let me tell you how many times we talked about diversity and inclusion in my 4-year degree. We didn't, right? Inclusion in those aspects were just referring to disabilities. There was no real other kind of inclusion. We didn't talk about anything else, And I would venture to guess that for a lot of other college programs and a lot of other professional prep programs, the same kind of thing is happening. All of this kind of education is considered to be kind of extra, out on the periphery. Even when we get brought into like professional development days, these are like the optional elective things that folks can choose to attend, right? And this kind of education should be everywhere for everybody, because once we've received this information, it's much easier to advocate for people, right? It's much easier to advocate for people that we've learned about, people that we've learned about the issues that they're facing, than it is to just come in kind of from nowhere, not really knowing what to expect or what to do. And then we want to make sure that organizations have comprehensive anti-bullying and anti-discrimination policies on the books. This could be workplace anti-discrimination, it could be school district anti-bullying. And when it says comprehensive, what that means is that it includes sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression as protected classes, right? That's a thing for administrators, school boards, nonprofit boards, like leadership to do, but we need everybody else to advocate for it to get there, right? And all of these things are relevant whether you are working in person or you're working virtually. Gender neutral restrooms are really important. Logistics are important, right? We hear from students who avoid eating and drinking all day just so that they don't have to use the restroom, right? They'll go 8 or 9 hours without eating or drinking so that they don't have to go, to completely avoid any issue that might be caused by using the bathroom. That causes serious health issues. So when we have restroom policies that are inclusive of everyone, when we have access to gender neutral restrooms, we can help some of those health issues, right? Inclusive marketing and images are just as important as using inclusive materials elsewhere, right? So if you are doing like marketing or campaigning for an organization, make sure that people can see themselves in your organization. And then having LGBTQ resource lists ready for people can be really important as well. So whether that means a list for young people that you work with that say like, ooh, Kaleidoscope Youth Center is a place that you can go for programming. Or if you're in a school setting, like, ooh, such and such teacher is the GSA advisor, get in touch with them. Or if you have like a mental health resource list, like these are all of the therapist offices in Central Ohio that are LGBTQ supportive and affirming. Anything like that could be a resource list that you have ready for folks that you're working with. And that's going to look different depending on what demographic you're working with. So I've mentioned a few times being a visible ally, right? And then the question is, what does that mean when we say visible ally? Like, you're all here because you want to be allies, right? Like, you wouldn't be here if you didn't. But when we say visible, what does that part mean? I have a few examples. And the first one is, I think the first one is what not to be, right? And I want you to imagine a student saying any of these things about staff that they're working with. The counselors at my school have never said whether we can come to them about LGBTQ subjects or not. So we really don't know if they're well educated about the LGBTQ community. Okay. Those school counselors could be super well-meaning, super well-intentioned. We are here to be allies. We are here to support our LGBTQ students. Anytime they come to us to chat, we will be here to talk to them. And they haven't made it obvious. They haven't told all of the students, like, we are allies. These are our opinions. This is our stance. We will create this safe space. And so the counselors are probably sitting here like, oh, we must not have any trans students at our school because they haven't come to talk to us about anything. And meanwhile, the queer and trans students are over here thinking, oh, it would be great to talk to a counselor, but we're not sure if they're affirming or not. because they haven't made it obvious, right? The next quote is, at school, I've been bullied and called slurs by other students. And when I asked the principal to help my situation, he laughed at me and told me that I was overreacting. I find it extremely hard to trust the adults at my school because they more than likely share the same opinions. I have a photo of Umbridge here. If you are a Harry Potter person, welcome to this analogy. If you are not a Harry Potter person, please forgive me. This will only last 30 seconds. I have a photo of Umbridge, and I want you to imagine, right, if all of the students at Hogwarts had believed that every single teacher had the same opinions as Umbridge, right? Imagine if Dumbledore, Hagrid, like none of them had shown even covertly that they were there for the students, right? The students would have been like, oh my gosh, like this, teacher came in and took everything over and we have nobody to turn to. But in the plot line, like it was clear that like Dumbledore was really on the student's side. Hagrid was really on the student's side. Like the students knew that, right? So what I'm saying here is be like Dumbledore, be like Hagrid. Make it obvious that you are there as an ally, and that like, even if there are other people working with you that are less affirming, make sure that the people that you are working with are clear on where you stand and that you are there to support them, right? And I see yikes in the chat, so I'm glad at least somebody got that analogy. I always wonder how that's going to go off, if people are going to like write me off, like, what is she talking about? It's hard in this virtual room where I can't like see people's faces. Oh, thanks. Okay. So then my third quote is, I know my school is generally accepting. The GSA gave the safe space stickers to all of the teachers. Most of them put them up, so I know I won't be judged for talking about my identity, right? This is an example of being visible. Whether it's rainbows, whether it's a specifically safe space poster, you can see mine on the wall behind me. Like teachers could put this on their bulletin board. Y'all could put it on your office doors, wherever. Whether it's like a little pride lapel pin or a pronoun pin, whether it's just pronouns on your name tag or pronouns in your email signature, those are little symbols that are really visible to people. So even if you haven't reached the point that you are loud and vocal about your opinions and your allyship, just by having these little signs and symbols, you can make it visible to the people that need it, right? And then they will come to you for that help because they've seen, hey, I noticed like you had a pride flag stuck to your window. Like, can I talk to you about this issue, right? People will actually come out and find you. I know I mentioned a little while ago about intervening or calling out negative behavior, and I wanted to quick go through how we do that. Right? So first we want to address it immediately. Don't wait 5 minutes if you don't have to. Address it in the moment. And name that behavior. What exactly was said that was not okay to say? Right? Pick it right out. This is what you said. This is not okay to say. Turn it into a teachable moment. What did you mean instead? Right? And my favorite example here is students saying, "That's so gay." I thought we left "That's so gay" in middle school in 1999. Apparently we did not. Like something like 98.8% of students hear "That's so gay" on a regular basis. And I am convinced that the students that are saying things like "That's so gay" honestly don't know why it's bad, right? People have not taken the time to say, don't say that, say this instead, or what did you mean by that? And so they just say it, right? There is no like reason for them not to. So I think in this case, we want to address it immediately and name that behavior. Hey, we don't say that things are gay, right? Teachable moment. What are we talking about? Are we talking about the homework? So what did you actually mean? You don't like the homework? You don't want to do the homework? You think the homework is silly, bad? That's fine. You're allowed to feel that way. And you are allowed to say those things. you are not to say that the homework is gay, because first of all, homework does not have a sexuality. It doesn't make sense at all. Homework can't be gay. And when we use gay as an insult, we're insulting a huge group of people that don't deserve that, right? Tie in the personal if you want to, right? When you say that something is gay as an insult, you're insulting me and I don't appreciate that. Or you're insulting my best friend and I don't appreciate that. Support the targeted person if there is one, and then hold aggressors accountable and encourage them to hold each other accountable. I think when we're working with young people, one of the most important things that we can think about is using other young people as those allies, right? Like, hey, call your friends in when they say stuff like that. Act like it's not cool to say that thing, and they're much more likely to stop saying it as if I, the awkward adult, act like it's not cool. Because they don't care what I think, right? I want to leave us with some virtual learning considerations because we are still in a pandemic. I don't know, people keep saying the pandemic's over. We're still here. We're still here in a pandemic. A lot of things are still virtual, right? So some virtual learning considerations to make when we're working with young people. When we're talking about school systems, library card systems, wherever something has a name attached to an account, right? It's often going to have the legal name. If a student has changed their name, that may not reflect in whatever system we're using. So it's important that we try to figure out a way to log that chosen name with their legal name, right? Legal names are always going to be on certain files, and we want to make sure that we're still calling them verbally by their chosen name. With virtual learning considerations, maybe we want to go in Zoom on the back end, for example, and change a roster to reflect a chosen name so that when other students see those names, it's the correct name, right? Maybe we want to add pronoun fields if we can. If there is an extra ability to add a drop-down field or a fill in the blank, allow students to do that. Student email addresses can be an issue because they'll often have a legal name in them. This is one of those examples where I had to advocate for a student because of adultism, right? I had a student who had changed their first name a while back, but it wasn't a legal change. And so their student email address was still their legal name. And they approached a counselor about it, and the counselor was like, oh, students can't change their email addresses, sorry. And so we called the district diversity person, and she was like, oh yeah, let me get in touch with IT, we can make that change, right? And so that way the student had their actual chosen name as part of their email address. And then being on screen, I want to mention, as things keep going virtual, as Zoom keeps being an everyday thing in people's lives, one thing we discovered at Kaleidoscope, we discovered the hard way, is that most of our trans kids really hate having to look at themselves on screen or hear their own voices on Zoom. And I would imagine this is probably hard for all teenagers, right? Regardless of gender dysphoria or not. And I think it's an important nuance to consider. Since the pandemic started, whether or not to require students to have their cameras on, I think was a subject of some debate. And I just want to toss gender dysphoria and self-image into all of the other stuff that was already swirling around in that conversation. I think this is part of why our Discord server has been much more successful than any of our Zoom programming, because our youth aren't going to sign into Zoom, right? A, they're tired of being on Zoom all day for school. But B, they just want to be text-based. They just want to type their message and send it off and read more messages coming through. So I know that was a lot of information. I threw a lot of information at you. I want to open up the chat for a few minutes. And this says Slido. I'm going to skip the Slido. We're just going to use the chat box. But I'm interested in hearing what kind of individual changes you can resolve to make moving forward, right? So take a minute to think about all of the things we talked about so far. And you all are coming from many different places. So think about the way that your program currently runs and try to identify places that you can make a small change, right? And then I'm interested in seeing those come into the chat. What kind of individual changes you want to make moving forward. And we'll give this about 2 minutes. And then we'll switch to organizational changes that you might encourage your leadership to make moving forward. Cool. So Amy says I can put what pronouns I use behind my name. That's awesome. For those of us who are cisgender, we often fall into this habit of, because we have been socialized to assume genders and pronouns, we assume that everybody else is going to assume our pronouns correctly, right? Because maybe our pronouns do align with our gender expression, which does align with our gender identity, right? But all of that is a privilege, right? And when we as cis folks can normalize that pronoun use, we make it easier for trans and non-binary folks to introduce themselves with pronouns and not have it be a huge thing every time. Not have it be like they're having to out themselves every time, because we've already made pronouns a part of the conversation. So awesome. You can have your pronouns in your email signature, your business card, your Zoom name tag. Anytime you write one of those like, hello, my name is sticky name tags, put your pronouns on it. Anywhere that you're putting your name, you can also put your pronouns. Making sure that we're putting the flag symbol and pronouns on a slide deck, both in schools and in the community. Awesome. Yeah, totally. And that's a great way to offer a visual, visible allyship symbol that's not like stuck in one place, right? Because we can do like bulletin boards and signs in the office and things of that nature. And if we're the kind of people that are moving around constantly, having some kind of tech version of that can be really important. So I think slide deck is a great idea. We went through and changed scenario names to be gender neutral in our Safe Dates program. That's fantastic. Fantastic. I love that. Yeah. And, I think that brings up the idea, this would be a total tangent, which I'm guilty of all the time, but there is this idea that somehow folks who are in same-sex relationships do not experience the same kind of intimate partner violence that other folks do. And that's absolutely false, right? We see just as much happening. We see just as much violence happening. We see just as much need for educating teenagers about healthy relationships versus unhealthy relationships, right? And so when that education, whether it's healthy relationships or specifically sex ed, I suppose, when it is assumed that everyone in these programs is heterosexual, we lose the LGBTQ kids' attention, right? They're like, I am not represented in this program, so I'm gonna not listen to this. Or this doesn't apply to me. Or I don't feel the same way that this person in this scenario does, so I must be different. There must be something different about me, and this doesn't apply to me. And so any way that we can make those programs more inclusive of everybody, I think people are much more likely to get things out of it. Jessica says, include how to follow up from accidentally misidentifying someone in curriculum for students. Yeah, and push to include this in policies and teacher training. Absolutely. Yeah, and Jessica's mention of pushing to include this is getting into our next question is going to be about organizational change. So this is thinking about like what you can do in this moment. But as we go through the chat, you can also start thinking about what kinds of policy change or organizational things you might advocate for in the future. Caitlin says, trying to be more mindful in using gender neutral terms like partner instead of husband. Absolutely. Adding pronouns to email address with a link to why it's important. That's a great idea. Actually, I'm going to do a quick example of that real quick. I've seen a lot of people do this, so I'm just going to show it on my screen. Hopefully you can see this. So there's a really good website called mypronouns.org. And what I've seen is a lot of folks will link to this website from their email signature. So their email signature will have like, this is my name, this is my title, underneath like pronouns in parentheses, and then it'll say like, what are these or what are pronouns? And people will link to mypronouns.org, whether it's this page, what and why, or the main site, which then people can go through and look at on their own. But yeah, cool stuff, and does part of that education piece as well. Being a visible ally was an eye-opener for me. Because we talk about it so much internally, it feels like it should be obvious to the outside. We all attend trainings and regularly discuss inclusivity, but there are so many ways we don't show allyship on our website, social media, and our facility signage, etc. Absolutely, 100%. I'm glad that this sparked some ideas for you, and I'm excited for you to go add everything to all of the comms at your org. Awesome. So my next question is about organizational change, right? We've talked a lot about what you can do individually, and I want to visit the organizational responsibility of support as well. So schools and organizations and programs need to have comprehensive anti-bullying and anti-discrimination policies so that when things are happening at the hallway level, there is policy to back you up, right? Other policies or resources that are helpful to have include gender transition plans, where if a young person decides to transition while they're attending school, there's a written plan for how it's going to happen, who knows about it or needs to know about it, what kind of plans are in place for any kind of pushback, negative experience, or communication with folks who don't necessarily need to be in the know, right? If you are a member of a school or an organization, you can advocate for all of your colleagues to receive this type of training. Ideally, LGBTQ affirmation would just be a regular part of everyone's professional development, not like a one-off visit to a staff meeting or an optional session on a PD day. And like, we take what we can get, right? Anytime folks are willing to have this kind of conversation is a positive. So advocate for your whole staff to have these conversations. So, thinking about these moving forward, what might be something that you might try to advocate for from your level for your organization to change? Or if you are leadership, what are some things that you might suggest for your organization moving forward? while folks are hopefully typing ideas for organizational change into the chat, I am going to drop some links in the chat. You may not be able to, well, you may be able to. Sometimes people have trouble copy pasting from Zoom chats. So if you cannot copy paste, these are in link form. So you will be able to just click them on your device and they should open. Cool. So Emily says, our agency is in the process now of hiring a new position of a community diversity coordinator to work between our agency and others who provide direct service, to hire more direct service staff and include more affirming and diverse services throughout the community. That's awesome. And that goes back to that representation piece, right? Like having people be represented within your own staff can be a huge start towards, you know, being inclusive at all levels. Kathy says work on becoming a trauma-informed organization, which would include gender-neutral training and policies. Absolutely. If you're still typing organizational change into the chat, keep typing. Type away, don't stop on my account. I put 3 messages in the chat with links to other resources. So I have how to get involved with Kaleidoscope Youth Center. I'm also going to switch slides so that you have our information and social media on the screen. Please feel free to follow us everywhere at Kaleidoscope at kycohio.org. And then I have some session handouts. So there's the handout that goes with this presentation, the handout that I would give you a paper of if we were in person, but you can have the PDF version, as well as GLSEN state snapshots, which includes some of that school discrimination statistics that we visited at the beginning of today's talk. And then some further education. So if the whole gender conversation is new for you, head over to the Gender Unicorn and it will talk you through what we mean when we say gender, gender expression, gender identity, sex assigned at birth, all of those things. What do they mean, right? GSA Network is really fantastic for understanding inclusion in schools and youth empowerment. Gender Spectrum is all about gender and youth. A lot of really great information about how gender exists with child development. And then the ALA Rainbow Book List I started including on all of my link lists. This is a small group that's associated with the American Library Association, and every year they put out a list of all of the best queer and trans related books that came out that year. They have a children's book list, a young adult list, adult fiction, adult nonfiction, really great things for, you know, folks to be able to provide to clients and students to have that representation out there. Kathy says providing pronoun training for staff, which we are doing next week. Yay! Awesome. So glad. And then we have 5 minutes left, so I want to open it up for Q&A. So thank you for all of your ideas about individual and organizational change. Feel free to pop them in if you still have ideas. And if you have any questions, now is a great time to put those in the chat. And if you don't, thanks so much for coming. And I think stick around though for your code.
Amanda, thank you so much. This was an amazing presentation. I took a plethora of notes of things that I learned, so I greatly appreciate you. While people are maybe still popping in questions into the chat, I want to go ahead and give us the CEU code word. The word is belong. I'll also put it in the chat. That's BELONG. Again, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat as well. And just a friendly reminder that after you leave this presentation, we'll be taking a 15-minute break, followed by workshops that will start again at 3:15 p.m. And you can refer to our website to join the links for the rest of the workshops today in the closing session. And that website is oaesv.org/2021 conference program. Are there any questions for Amanda? A lot of kudos in the chat. Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead in the chat and put the link to the rest of our workshops in the chat, so you can please feel free to click on this to see the rest of the workshops today and find the link, the Zoom link for the closing ceremony as well. Alrighty, well, I think maybe Amanda will stick around for 2 more minutes before we close the room. But that is the end of our presentation for this workshop. And I hope you all enjoy your break. And again, our workshops will start back up at 3:15 today. And hopefully you can join us. Amanda, I can keep the room up for 2 more minutes, if that's okay with you, but we can close it if you're good.
Either way works for me.
Okay. All right, I'll close it down at 3:05. Or I think Emily will close it at 3:05. Emily, I'm talking like I'm the tech person. I'm so sorry.
No worries, no worries.
Well, thank you, Kyle. Thanks, Amanda, again. It was great.
For having us. Happy to be here. Absolutely fantastic program.
Thanks.
I live right next to KYC. I love you guys.
Oh, really?
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
See you later.
All right. Bye.
And I will go ahead and close now. So thank you again, Amanda.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Emily.